everyone. My name is Rachel Bosenberg. I'm Associate Curator here at the Anchorage Museum. And while I was not curator of the 2025 Alaska Triennial, I did work very closely with our juror, Mary Bradshaw. So I will briefly introduce the exhibition. Unfortunately, Acacia Johnson wasn't able to join us tonight. There was a last-minute emergency that came up. Everything's okay. But we are joined by Young Kim, who will speak first, and also Alanna DeRochi, who is right here. So we'll start with Young, and then I will speak about Acacia, and we'll end with Alanna. Indra's also recording. Don't hold recording. Sorry. Oh, excellent. It's okay. The 2025 Alaska Triennial has been held at the Anchorage Museum in a variety of different formats and names over the years. We returned to a triennial, so every 3-year format this year, and we also moved to a juried format, meaning that we had a juror who reviewed all of the different applications that we got, submissions from folks, and from a pool of 500 pieces by approximately 222 artists, she narrowed it down to 48 artists that you see here in this gallery. When she was reviewing, I don't know that she necessarily went in with a theme, but after she made her selections, she realized that landscape is really a big thing that comes through. Landscape, color, texture, also landscape in unexpected forms. So as you look around the room, you see traditional landscapes, the Alaska that we all know and well, but then also unusual or abstracted ways of viewing the land around us. And she speaks in her intro text about how a sense of place really permeates everything that we see in the gallery. Also, as she walked into it for the first time, Mary Bradshaw joined us here for the opening. I should also say that she is the Director of Visual Art at the Yukon Art Center in Whitehorse, so it's a really nice perspective of someone who is familiar with the northern landscape but not necessarily Alaska-centric. So it was nice to have her perspective as she was reviewing. As she walked in, Mary was just stunned by the amount of color. It's really hard to view in your mind's eye as you're looking through all of the applications on a screen, the size, the scale, the texture, the colors, and I think she was really delighted when she walked into this space and saw how much everything really pops. So I will pause it there, my introduction, because we'll get to hear from the artists. Young is going to speak first in front of his book. He also has a book that you can look at, which I'll let you explain all of that. Each artist is going to speak for about 10 minutes, then we'll pause, we'll do a little bit of a Q&A, so ask your questions right after the artist speaks. And we should be done by 6:15, if not a little bit earlier, since we just have 2 artists tonight. Young Kim was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska, where he currently resides. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Journalism and Public Communications from University of Alaska Anchorage, and recently earned a Master of Fine Arts in Photography from the Hartford Art School at the University of Hartford. He currently owns and operates the creative space The Stoop, which, if you are free after this, Hannah Yoon is visiting us. She's going to be giving a talk at The Stoop at about 7:15. It's located at 301 East Firewood, so easy for you to just scoot over there after we're finished here. I will pass the proverbial mic to Young.
Hi, my name's Young. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Kind of a shy guy. So. This is a hand-bound book made of images that I made, I think, from 2020 to 2022. It's titled What Good is Fruit That Is Not Sweet? And it's primarily images that I started making as my mom experienced her 2nd stroke. So it's like really like in the initial period, kind of a way for me to be present with her and spending time with her, and also just documenting this time that's changing in both of our lives, you know, as her as a mother and me as a son, and how those roles can change over time, and you know how our relationship to each other also changes. But I think that like with photography, I think the cool thing about it is that like whatever you're taking pictures of and how you choose to document things that are happening, the meaning can be changed over time, and you know, like the sentiment that you have attached to images can be different than what's initially being done at the moment of capture. So while it might have been like a documentation of her recovery process from her strokes, maybe afterwards it's more of like an investigation about, you know, about what it's like to be with each other and with our relationship, and you know, my ideas and curiosity about what it's like to be Korean American living in, you know, America, and about, you know, her life as an immigrant and things like that. But that's also just like part of my ideas about it. And I think the other cool thing about photography is that the images themselves can be just, it can be about whatever, but it's about what you decide to add meaning to as you're viewing it as a viewer, and that can be totally different than what I'm doing. So if you guys want to like page through and pass it around, this is one that you can kind of look at. If we're talking about like the physical book, I wanted to go with this hand-bound process kind of to mimic the like older historical Korean journals, that they would write about like the kings and emperors. Because even those, I think that this process is similar in a way that it's like solely from my perspective. And I think those journals, even they had historians writing them, and they'd be like, even the king would not have like say over what's being written. It's just strictly from one perspective. So like if the king is like, I fell off a horse, like he fell off a horse, and then he's like, don't write that in the journal. Then the historian will be like, oh, king fell off his horse and he told us not to write this in. But like even when I'm making this work, like it's there's a weird power dynamic within photography where like if you're making the images and the person that's being photographed, obviously she's wanting to help me with what I'm working on in this project form, but she's also like a little bit self-conscious, about being photographed in this way, and but ultimately she wants what I'm wanting, kind of like this, like her dream is for like my dream to be fulfilled, and I think that's like part of this idea of the American dream, and for immigrants, a lot of like your children's success is your own success, right? That's where like the idea of the fruits come in. This fruit can have so much also different meanings, but yeah, it's supposed to resemble like one of those journals, open spine, hand-bound. So yeah, I don't really have too much to say, but if you guys have questions, I can answer questions all day.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't have the text memorized, but I thought it was really important that we try to have a physical copy for visitors to look through. Obviously, it is currently off view because some visitors were a little too excited and enthusiastic, but the text that you have in there is so lovely. It really like tells this fuller story that you can't convey with just a single page that's open. Can you talk to us a little bit about writing the text for that?
Yeah, so I think the main text is, like my favorite fruit was, I forget what I wrote exactly also, but like watermelon was my favorite fruit, and eventually it became hers too. And I think it's the same thing with this idea about my dream becoming her dream, and maybe her dream when she came to the U.S. was different than what it is now. But also I just remember like when I was growing up, like I feel like I asked her every year what her favorite fruit was, and every year it changed. So maybe she's just lying to me or something. But then throughout the book, there's also little stickies, and there's a page at the end that has the translations for them. But they're just things that my mom would always say to me, that I had to write down just to be able to look back on them later. But I also wanted them to be, I think they stood out to me because I think there are eventually things that I could see myself saying to her, or, like maybe she'll write, do you need any money today? But I find myself asking her that more than she asks me that these days, right? Or, like there's one thing that says like, why are you so busy? So like I might forget what you look like. And like I might see myself saying that about her one day also, So I wanted it to be the same idea, was this reversal of roles, and who's taking care of who. So
did you feel a little bit of an impetus to include the text maybe also as a way of, a camera lens can be so ambiguous, and like you're saying, it could have so many meanings. Do you feel like there was a little bit of wanting to explain your intentions a little bit to your mom?
Yeah, I think that I do want to kind of add narrative and kind of guide whoever's looking at the work in a certain way. But I think that's the power of photography. Is like you can look at the same set of images, and person A and person B are going to have totally different conclusions out of that work. So, but I think the book is important because you're kind of guiding people through a process, kind of like similar to like if you're listening to like an album, the musician puts songs in a certain sequence in order, right? Like, or on purpose, like it's all thought through. Whereas like a live show or like a gallery setting, it can change up all the time, and people can have a different experience every single opportunity.
sequence or saying like, I don't want that image, or did you let her do that?
There's certain things that she would say, like I remember showing her every image and saying, like, flipping through my dummy book that I made with like just taped prints on a notebook. She'd be like, oh, why is that in there? And then like the next time she didn't remember that it was in there. So like, and I think at the very end I showed her like the finished product and she's like, flipped through in like 30 seconds. It's like, oh, it's whatever. I think she was just glad to like be done helping me because I was finished with something. And like in the same way that she has like been sacrificing her life to help me fulfill what I want to do in my life, it's the same process where she's helping me to finish this another thing in my life, right? So it's like semi-collaborative, but like more so just like she just wants to help me do my thing. Yeah.
Did the process of creating the book change your relationship in any ways?
I mean, I think when I come around the camera, like my mom kind of tries to hide a little bit, but other than that, I think that, you know, I've always had a good relationship with my mom, so I think not too much. Maybe since this portion of our life is done, you know, like this chapter is done or this book is shelved, maybe I don't want to take so many pictures as often anymore. I just kind of want to enjoy our time together.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that also opens the door to other opportunities for different types of image making.
What are you working on next, whether photographically or otherwise? What projects are you focused on?
I think coming up, like I grew up playing high school American football here in Anchorage, so I'd like to revisit that and photograph that in a way that's like not so much like, you know, like ESPN Sports, but like maybe more, what is this experience like for boys that are learning to become men, and like the camaraderie between them as teammates, and you know, there's this relationship between players and coaches, and then players and parents, and then the coaches and parents, and you know, there's like a lot of weird relationships within that I think has, you know, not only just shaped me, but a lot of people that I know. So that's something that I'm interested in photographing that in a way that's true to what I've experienced. Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of your story you're trying to tell is about relationships between people. Do you ever shoot landscapes or other?
Yeah, I mean, I do love going outside and taking pictures of landscapes. And I think it's hard for me personally to create something out of that, you know, like that's cohesive and that's more than just like a picture of a mountain, right? But when I figure it out, I'll do something with it, I guess. Yeah.
Attention museum patrons. The time is 6 p.m. and the Anchorage Museum is now closed. Once again, the time is 6 p.m. and the Anchorage Museum is now closed. Thank you for coming, and we hope you visit again soon.
It's actually 5:45. If there aren't any other questions, I have a question. I should have sent this to you in advance that I like to ask folks. Beyond your art practice, do you have any recommendations for books or TV shows or music? It could be expansive, any genre, anything.
I like reading The Old Man and the Sea once a year. I hated it when I was a kid, but I find that like, as I'm growing up, I feel like I can pull something different out of it every year. But like more than just like a single topic, maybe I love like sci-fi, and I think it's because like sometimes you need this like weird world to pull yourself out of what's so familiar, so that you can recognize what is actually familiar, if that makes sense, right? So like, I don't know, like, have you guys all seen The Shape of Water? So it's like, you know, like I had a roommate that could not get past the fact that it's about a mermaid having a relationship with a person, or like a sea creature with a person, and I was like, I feel like you're kind of missing the point where it's just about like humans' desire to be in a relationship with another something, right? But sometimes you need this like wacky world to be able to pinpoint what it is about, like what feels familiar. I like Orson Scott Card's Past Watch, Redemption of Christopher Columbus. And it's kind of like this like book that was written about this future that they have these machines that can look at any point back in history and time, and then they have this ability to kind of like pinpoint a time and like walk through it like virtually. And I feel like it's not unlike what we have available to us now. So then it's about all this like responsibility on our part to like pinpoint what is happening and why, and then they have this opportunity to go back in time and refix it. So I think that's what interests me about images and just like storytelling that way. So that's what I would recommend.
Acacia Johnson, unfortunately, is not able to be here tonight, but I'm going to speak about her photograph for a little bit, so we still get that. Feel free to come closer. We may also get the museum is closed at 6 warning again at 6 o'clock. So I had mentioned earlier that with submissions, the juror gets a photograph of the artwork. It's I should have mentioned also that it's a blind jury process. So when Mary was looking through everything, she did not have any identifying information about the artist. She could see the title of the artwork, the dimensions, the medium, a photograph of it, and then a brief artist statement that they were coached and advised to keep anonymous, so it wouldn't be like, I am Rachel Bosenberg, this is what I do. So what I'm going to read to you today is a little bit of an Acacia bio, and then also how she spoke about the series that this photograph is from. The photograph is called Windsock, Toksook Bay. It's from 2022, and I am not an airplane pilot, but I think this is familiar for anyone who flies around Alaska. Acacia Johnson is a photographer, writer, and 2023 National Geographic Explorer based in Anchorage, Alaska. Drawn to painterly light and otherworldly landscapes, her work is focused on the environment, conservation, and the connections between people and place. She has made over 50 expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctica as a photographer and a guide, an effort to inspire wonder and compassion for those remote regions during a time of rapid change. Now we'll get into the description of this series, which is known as To Know the Earth from Above. Across Alaska's vast and diverse terrain, one sound can be heard almost anywhere: the distant drone of an aircraft. Only 20% of Alaska is accessible by road, and dozens of remote settlements, predominantly Alaska Native communities, rely on aircraft for essential services like mail and groceries, medical care, and emergency transport. Since the first mail delivery plane took off in 1924, a century ago, small aircraft capable of landing on short runways or natural features like tundra, glacier, beaches, and water have played a major role in Alaska's development. Today, nearly all of Alaska is dependent on aviation, both for essential transport between communities and to access remote wilderness areas. To Know the Earth from Above is a series of photographs taken in 2022 with support from the Canon Female Photojournalist Grant. From Anchorage to the Arctic to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, the images tell the story of how flying is central to Alaska's infrastructure and part of its culture. So when we're done here, I have 2 QR codes that you can scan. One of them will take you to Acacia's website, where you can see about 20 or so photographs from the series. I encourage you to check it out. And then the second one is a QR code to a TED Talk that she gave in March of 2024, where she talks about experiencing a sense of wonder in the natural world and how that can be a catalyst for conservation. She shines light on how changes in remote places affect life across the planet, and she also advocates for the importance of long-term research, indigenous knowledge, and storytelling and conservation. I listened to the first 10-ish minutes of it before coming up here, and it was really wonderful to see. So I'll have that QR code here if you'd like to scan that later tonight.
I too am a little nervous, so normally when I talk about my work, I just do it off the cuff, but I also kind of typed something up today, so I wouldn't feel as nervous. So I also first wanted to say that I really appreciate being asked to come do this talk today, and I greatly appreciate all the work and effort that went into just helping set up my piece for the exhibit. It probably wasn't easy, and sometimes I wonder if the museum staff looks at what comes in when I drop it off, and they're like, oh no. So I really am so grateful that it seems like everyone took a lot of time to help set up my piece. And I'm also very grateful to be in this exhibition with so many great Alaska artists. And also 2 of my favorite artists to follow on like Alaska Instagram are Young Kim and also Acacia Johnson. So thank you for letting me be here with one of you. So normally, like I said, when I talk about my work, I kind of just have already given it kind of a lot of thought because I have a long process of working on these pieces and I spend a lot of time with them. But this newer work has been kind of, in my mind, compared to how I'm used to working, what I consider sort of a long slog of like a new experiment. The animal forms that I'm working with, to me, feel, I guess, more experimental because they're more abstract than what I usually work with. And I'm also kind of working with what I consider, even though I've been doing ceramic work for 20 years, but glaze to me is kind of still a new material. I'm used to painting my work with paints, and so it's kind of a new step into something different. So I'll read like just some notes that I wrote down first, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit more about my piece. So my work usually employs animals as a more ambiguous subject matter to speak about human experiences or our separation and disconnect from the natural world. So I do think about human relationships. I also think about climate change. I think about the place that I live in when I'm making my work. And I also think about the places and people where I've lived prior to living in Alaska. This body of work started as an exploration into viewing animals more as objects, as a way to imbue them with metaphor and symbolism, less about anthropomorphizing them and like representing them with human emotions or like human characteristics or actions. It's also a way for me, like I mentioned, to explore more expressive surfaces using glaze as another, I consider it another material in my work, even though it's on top of my sculptures. I've always been interested in taxidermy and its ability to create illusion. So more recently, I began studying taxidermy's underlying, like the foam mannequin forms that are underneath the hides that you see. Because of that abstract nature, these fragmented bodies and heads are simply benign objects made of cheap foam, but I see them as transformative objects that are visually unsettling, but they can speak to preservation, symbology, and an absence of presence. Taxidermy is created from animals that humans have hunted, skinned, and transformed into a new object that can act as a souvenir or a trophy. With the mannequin forms, the animal itself is no longer recognizable, so a lot of times it's like, what was that, or what is that, what are you making? You know, a lot of animals do have certain symbology to them, to individuals, to specific cultures. So I'm not really trying to reach into that as much. I just am kind of viewing them as an object. So with the mannequin forms, the animal itself is no longer recognizable. It's stripped of its features and is merely meant to be the foundation that its skin will cover in taxidermy. Its main purpose being to assist in transforming the animal back to its original visual representation. So the viewer isn't meant to ever see this form. It stays hidden beneath the skin to preserve its effectiveness to the illusion of life. To me, these objects feel like a metaphor for darker aspects of the human experience, like masking inner struggles like depression or discomfort in hiding one's true self. So this piece is titled Rigor/Mortis. Literally, rigor can relate to intense challenges, harsh inflexibilities, unrelenting productivity, in general, severities that make life difficult. Mortis obviously means like death and mortality, but visually I associate these two words with a dead animal, tense, stiff, and immobile. Emotionally, this work tries to connect all of these meanings to notions of anxiety, of feeling trapped, frozen, helpless, mainly the body being used and discarded, upended, and unable to move. Figuratively, maybe a mind and body worked to death. This piece allowed me to consider ways that we can be betrayed by our own mind or body when the rigor becomes destructive. Impactfully, it also allowed me to come to terms with ways that I have been betrayed for my body, objectified and discarded throughout my own rigorous path in my education and career. The detached heads and fragmented bodies intend to give shape to the remains of such struggles. And so in kind of like starting to create these sculptures based off these taxidermy forms, I really just kind of like pour through these taxidermy catalogs and look at these different kind of they're not skeletal, they're not, you often can't tell what species it is. But I find the abstract nature really exciting to be able to kind of explore those kind of fragments in different ways and try to form connections between maybe the different parts or how I arrange the parts. And so a lot of the experimenting for me is just like making these things and then looking at them in my studio and trying to figure out how I can make sense with them. And then exploring these new kind of glazed surfaces and how maybe they can become more expressive. So the glazed surface that's on these two pieces here and more the darker kind of metallic look it's just like a glaze that's mixed up with a really heavy amount of copper. And I think visually to me, it sort of mimicking metal makes them look heavy and burdensome to me. And so I wanted that to also have that feel. I also really, most of the time when I see my work and I'm comfortable with it or familiar with it, it's like on tables and parts in my space, in my studio area. And so to me, in some ways, that reminds me of all these like images I also pour over of like taxidermists and people working on museum dioramas and museum displays of like creating objects for museums. And so I find a lot of magic in sort of the behind the scenes work. And that's also why some of the taxidermy forms are exciting to me, because it makes me feel like I get to see behind the scenes of these things, but also I'm the one behind the scenes making these things. So in some ways, when I'm making them, I want to see a bit of humor in them too, but a lot of the thought that I have about them can lead to darker things. So I don't know if that was 10 minutes or not. But yeah, I guess this has been a really good exploration for me to be able to work in a different way than I typically do, even though I'm still working sculpturally. It just feels like it's taking me a long time to kind of sort through these objects. Did you have a question? So yeah, I think that's maybe what I have to say about this piece. And I would be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Yes.
The legs, are they clay as well?
Yep.
And glaze?
The legs are paint and stains. So I actually made this body form, I guess, right side up or upside down.
Attention museum patrons. The time is 6 p.m. and the Anchorage Museum is now closed. Once again, the time is 6 p.m. and the Anchorage Museum is now closed. Thank you for coming and we hope to visit again soon.
So I made it kind of right side up, but the legs were kind of stumped off, and then I dried it and fired it, and then I built the legs out of fresh clay on top of the initially fired piece, and then I removed them, I fired them, and then I attached them later. So the body was then like glazed separately and then put together with the painted elements after the fact.
What's bouncing off of the legs, they feel almost like matchsticks. You talk about like the color and the form of the legs.
Yeah, I guess for some reason when I sketched this idea out, I wasn't thinking of anything violent per se, like blood. Sometimes I'll add like dripping things in my work, and then I look at it later and I'm like, that could be interpreted as something violent maybe. But I really just wanted to have like an intensity to it, but also bring attention to the fact that maybe the legs were severed and they at one point in time weren't part of the body, or I kind of wanted it to add to that feeling of being immobile and not being able to move, so there's no like sculpted hooks or anything like that. I really wanted them to feel more like it is this kind of abstract object. So matchsticks is pretty funny. Yes.
So you're interested in taxidermy. Do you remember the first time you saw taxidermy, or the first thing that caught your eye about it?
I mean, I guess I grew up in central Illinois, and everyone hunts white-tailed deer, and so it's rare to go into someone's home and not see a white-tailed deer on the wall. But the difference I see, and I guess that was kind of like my first instance in having experience around taxidermy. When I was in graduate school, I kind of started looking into taxidermy again because I did a visit to the American Museum of Natural History and visited their hall of dioramas, and it like blew my mind. The illusion that they're able to create, and I did a lot of reading up on the background stories that involve like a crazy taxidermist going out into like Africa and killing all these animals and bringing them back, and it's kind of like hard to read those sort of stories, you know, where they have them under the guise of like education. But so then I had that experience with taxidermy, and then even before moving to Alaska, I lived in Montana, and then I had sort of a different experience with seeing taxidermy or being around hunting, because here, as opposed to where I'm from in Illinois, I find people actually go hunting to live off of what they hunt, where I didn't get that as much. You know, my family didn't hunt, but most of the people I knew specifically hunted to have the trophy on the wall. And so it was kind of a different experience to be able to see different sides of why it's created and how different people use animals, or even use animals as objects as part of culture and things like that. I've always just kind of been more interested in it. So, yeah. Not sure if that answered your question. Yeah.
Is there a significance in the difference in scale from the head to the body?
Yeah, I think like it's not like this head is meant to be on this animal's body, like compared to what I was looking at, or I think I wanted the head to be sort of propped up, like it still is serving a function somehow, even though the body is kind of frozen in place. So I did want it to maybe have more of like a concentration on it in a way, or have more of like a presence to it than what's kind of left of the body. Like the body is discarded in a way. It's not able to move anymore, so the head is kind of still left. The thoughts are still left, things like that. Yeah.
Is there a significance to the notch and essentially where the skull would be that's stuffed out of the head?
Yeah, I think I started like looking especially at some of the antlered animals, mannequin heads, because you can see where the mannequins are made to have the rack kind of put on later to the form. And when I think of like seeing a deer's antlers or an elk's antlers or a moose's antlers, to me I always think of them as like protective. And so I had originally thought about, some of my sketches showed me like, you know, how I could make some antlers, and I have made antlers for other animals before, but I didn't want those to be on there, so it's kind of like removing a bit of its protective rack. So and it makes them also look very removed. It almost looks like they're missing part of the brain, or it makes them look more, yeah, abstract. So.
I have the same final question for you. Do you have any other recommendations outside of art, of favorite movies, books, TV shows, podcasts?
It's funny too that you know, listening to Kim's answer and thinking about in my class, I teach at UAA, and in my class I've asked my students to like make a sculpture about like some of their favorite lyrics, to try to interpret them into a sculptural object, and ask them to like make a playlist to bring in about, you know, music that's important to them. So far no one has spoken up in class to like play their playlist yet in front of others, but I do listen to a ton of music, and I'm kind of stalled on the podcasts and things like that right now, but I have been listening to a lot of Blue Reed just because I do that, and I also have been listening to like female artists like Lucinda Williams and Nico Case, because sometimes when I hear their music I can hear bits of myself, like it's like a woman's perspective in like rock music or things like that. So those are just a couple I can think of off the top of my head.